Welcome back to Not Quite Art, the art show that believes that there's life outside the gallery. This week we're on a mission to find out what vandals, deadbeats, protesters, geeks and trespassers all have in common. And how the hell am I going to justify putting them all in an arts program? What do you suppose Australia's #1 cultural tourist attraction is? Maybe this? What about that? Maybe this? Or that? Well, you'd be surprised to find that a lot of people think it's this. The laneways of Melbourne, packed with cafes, bars, milk crates, and what some people try and pass off as art. This place is kind of like an art gallery. I wonder if they've got one of those audio tours. Might see if I can go and find the curator. I tried to find the person in charge here, but I think the point is that there isn't one. The best I could find was Andy. He's part curator, part artist, part tour guide, and he makes a mean cup of tea.
Lonely Planet conduct kind of surveys through their website of what backpackers or travellers to Australia are interested in, and just recently they've nominated the Laneways of Melbourne as the #1 cultural attraction in this country, beating out all the state galleries and institutions, and even some places like the Rock Art in Kakadu. They print maps of the city of Melbourne and they have, like, you know, you can see street art in this location, this location.
We've got some throw-ups here by Trays and take 2.
What's a throw-up?
So you've got an outline and you've got a fill. And the fill is really patchy. And a throw-up it means exactly that. It's done really quick. You throw it up, it's done on the run, as opposed to a piece, you know, which is something that's like may have several colours and it's very tight. They're known as pasties or paste-ups. So you go around with a roll of posters in your bag, bit of wallpaper paste. You know, a lot of this work is designed to be done very fast.
Which is an occupational hazard, I assume, of the street artist.
Don't want to stay too long anywhere. This is some work by Haha. And these works were done at the height of Melbourne's gangland wars. So this is Mario Condello, who's since been assassinated, but at the time was behind bars. It's a collaboration between 9 female street artists. The reason why we were able to do this, well, we had Fafi here in Australia, and she's one of the most famous female graffiti artists in the world at the moment. She's from France. She's kind of unique in that she uses a brush and paints rather than spray cans. Then we've got a work here by Vexter, who's one of Melbourne's most notorious female stencil artists. This is her work behind here too, this wallpapering of like skulls and flowers. There's some work here by Phlox from New Zealand. Again, really interesting stencil work, great colour, sense and stuff.
With me, you come home with good boy and count bounds now. Yeah, you understand what we got up and on the fast.
This is the start of the breakdown of this piece, you know. A couple of people will come and tag it. Eventually, it'll have enough tags on it that someone will go, all right, that's ripe for redoing, you know, and the whole thing will disappear.
How does an artist feel when their work gets painted over or ripped off or you know, broken?
Well, it's really part of the culture, so nothing's forever in street art, you know, and there's a kind of respect process that goes on. Something that's fantastic will, by a process of natural selection, get left for longer than something that's crappy, and that's one of the #1 rules in street art, is you don't go over anything that you can't beat. Yeah. That's kind of how the organic process makes itself. This has just happened in the last 24 hours. This went up like yesterday, and then when I came into the city this morning, someone's gone right over the top of it here with this, and they've capped it, you know. So it's a massive disc going on here.
I'm sending out the signal. We share too much and I'll be blind, and if I didn't give a shit, I'd probably just run. That's why I'm sending out the signal. 1, 2, can you hear me? We've shared too much and I'll be blind, and if I didn't...
Andy also runs City Lights, 2 outdoor galleries where the artworks are displayed in light boxes. At any time of the day or night, you can see these works for free around the laneways of inner city Melbourne.
We felt that a lot of people were kind of alienated by art. When they go into a gallery, they're like, I don't think I have a way into this, or I don't understand it. But they really understand advertising very well, and to our mind, it's the same language. It's all about symbolism and imagery and understanding those things. And so we're like, all right, let's present art in the same way that advertising gets presented. Street and graffiti artists relate to the light boxes as well. You know, it's street art also, and then through showing graffiti artists in these places, it's attracted more people here.
On any day of the week, you'll see people walking these laneways, taking photographs, admiring the artwork. This lane's even conveniently located just across the road from Federation Square. And if you think graffiti tourism is hard enough to explain, what about the people who come here to get their wedding photos taken?
There's one of the world's most famous stencil artists here. You see this little rat parachuting out of the sky, which is by Banksy from the UK.
Banksy's become a kind of very famous, you know, capital A artist, I guess, in in sort of the art scene. Like, if you could cut that off the wall, do you have any idea what that'd be worth?
Well, Angelina Jolie bought some stencil art from Banksy for about $400,000 US, and people are selling works like that at auction in the UK at the moment for upwards of £80,000.
Did anyone bring... There's a lot more to street art than just spray cans and graffiti. Street art is actually about artists having a dialogue with the public. This wall behind me has been made up by some anonymous artist coming along and depositing these pictures night after night. I think it makes the city a more interesting place. Either this street art thing really is a big deal, or maybe Melbourne just has Australia's most unimaginative photographers. Whenever any band, fashion label, actor or politician wants to look cool, it seems the graffiti-covered laneways are the only place to be photographed. Even Victoria's new tourism chief came here to get his photo done. Well, I guess it goes well with the national advertising campaign. If all this seems a bit strange, then it's probably because we're all a lot more used to seeing newspaper articles about graffiti and street art that look a lot more like this. Some newspaper articles even seem to be suggesting that we should shoot graffiti artists.
Oh my God, you were excitement on legs, and everything you said gave me an incitement to beg. I don't claim to be no expert, but I like what I read. Was just trying to get your attention, I get you in bed.
Why would an artist ever consider putting their work on a dingy brick wall rather than a clean white one?
Partly of the history of using streets for communication, I suppose, and the huge audience that you get, which you just can't get in a gallery. You know, you can have a piece in a spot for a couple of years, and you might have, if it's in the city, thousands of people walking past a day, and just how it enters into the public memory of that area.
With an ache from something I couldn't pursue.
So little space available for public interaction with, you know, politics in general. What, you get a vote every 4 years. You know, it's essentially most people's interactions with politics, and it's about, you know, a direct space where people can voice their opinions about the world. The aesthetics of graffiti is created by the experience of doing graffiti, you know, whether you're someone doing a drawing and someone comes along halfway through and you have to run off. Yeah. You know, so therefore that's the finished artwork. Tried to do stencils on this wall many a time. They always get painted the next day. They obviously don't like it. That's how I decide which walls I don't like. The ones where they paint over the next day, I'm like, well, they probably don't like it. You know, the other walls where they'll be there, you know, it's been there for 6 years, or probably forever, I don't know, you know, so you think, they probably don't mind. A lot of Australian graffiti was really based on American type of graffiti, you know, the big sort of wild style, and I think a lot of us stencil artists, when we started getting, really wanted to try and create an Australian aesthetic, and I think that's with this repetition of Ned Kelly's a good example of it, you know. I'm sure I just went crazy with it because it's such a cool image, and he's an outlaw and everyone loves bushrangers, but then all these people will read into it, you know, and they'll
Political
protest and stuff, and which it is, of course, but you know, it is just a simple act too of trying to create an Australian feel.
I've heard a rumour that you're now an artist whose work is in the National Gallery in Canberra.
Yeah, well, yes, so have I. I've heard that too. Yeah, it's true. The National Gallery's just brought up a really big collection of stencil work on paper. which is pretty fascinating, and it's entering into their printmaking collection, sort of as a historical document of Melbourne street art. Yeah. I mean, I think it was just Melbourne, the collection they've bought, and it's really interesting for us. It's sort of, they see it as like an artist proof.
I'm not sure how I feel about street art in major galleries. It's not that I don't think it's worth collecting and preserving this stuff. It's just that I think the act of sticking up on a white wall kind of misses the point. Is it just me, or do places like this make you feel self-conscious? It's as though there's a gallery effect at work, where the grandeur of the building so overwhelms you that you can't just react to the art around you. Plenty of artists are actually starting to question whether the gallery is a particularly good place for art at all.
But there is a whole other world of art out there. There are activities that happen in everyday life and in spaces beyond what we normally would regard as art spaces.
This is Lucas, and he's also one of the people responsible for one of my all-time favourite art projects. The Uncollectable Artist series features all kinds of artists that are working outside the gallery context, whether they're defacing billboards, stickering from one end of the country to the other, setting off explosive garden gnomes.
And it began as a joke, actually.
A lot of good things do begin as a joke.
It began as a joke because of the, you know, that magazine called Australian Art Collector, which every year they run a feature on Australia's 50 most collectible artists. And we thought what we might do is produce a small zine of Australia's 50 most uncollectible artists and sort of sneak it into the magazine.
Sort of go into newsagents and drop it in.
Yeah, so people would buy that from the shop, and then they'd realise that there was this kind of guerrilla magazine slid into it, just some cheap photocopied thing. And when it was just 2 or 3 of us started joking about this, but the more that we began to talk about it, the more we realised that we were connected to a vast network of people who worked in this way that we realised was uncollectible. The key point for me about the bubblegum cards is that...
Let's backtrack a sec. You just said bubblegum cards.
Yeah. Well, they originally were sold, actually, we had these vendor jackets, and it was part of the joke. Part of the joke of the Australia's 50 most uncollectible artists cards was that they would become collectible bubblegum cards, and you got a random set of 8 in a pack with a stick of gum. You want to buy some bubblegum cards?
So do you want to talk me through the sort of people that you were featuring? I mean,
well, there's some of them down here that, some of my favourites. This is a project by artists Nobody and Maxine Fox, and they are particularly interested in weeds. So, again, with their project, it made sense to have it situated in a place where there were a lot of weeds, rather than the idea of getting a whole lot of weeds, extracting them and taking them and putting them in an art gallery. What they did was to create a kind of tour of weeds at an abandoned drive-in site.
So how did that work?
Well, you put on some headphones and you took a glass of champagne, and it directed you through this shrubbery.
Do you have your glass of champagne? Let's start with number 1.
It would hone you in on to look at a particular plant amongst all the shrubbery, and you'd realise that it was a particular kind of weed. It would tell you information about it, how noxious it was, and how illegal it is to even look at it and not pull it out.
Is that the case? That they actually...
Yeah, the Noxious Weed Act is quite strict, but obviously very difficult to enforce. Yeah, but there was so I suppose it was a project about raising awareness of the overlooked.
When I see another example here, this is a piece of fairly public intervention that some people would question that this is art at all.
I mean, this is Will and Dave, who it's definitely a project which you might call not quite art, but it involves paint.
Yes, there's definitely paint.
Paint is usually
there's an iconic arts institution involved.
That's right. It's cited at a cultural venue, and it is designed to make people think differently about the way that their society is making decisions. So those are 3 fairly standard criteria for a thing being an art object.
I actually went crazy collecting all these uncollectible artist cards, I think because it was a really great way of capturing a whole range of kind of ephemeral work. I really love them, like this one. This is a 28-kilometre in circumference geoglyph. It's essentially a big man that someone kind of drew in the desert in South Australia. That's from the air. You have to sort of see that thing from space. It's a whole range of them. All of them had a ranking system, which I think was the kind of the coolest thing about it, was projects were actually ranked. Like players are ranked and graded in football statistics, artists were ranked in the same kind of way. And they were ranked on a whole range of things. How anonymous or known the work was. It was better to be anonymous than known. Whether it was done for love or money, whether it was aesthetically beautiful or ugly. Ugly actually got bonus points. One of the cards that sort of became a whole much larger phenomenon was number 4. This is the empty show, where work isn't just shown outside an art gallery, but in abandoned and off-limits buildings.
What the movement is about, in a way, is the necessity or need for space and reclaiming empty or unused space. Often what happens is they find a derelict building, like an old steel factory or something that is obviously going to be redeveloped, and usually in an urban setting, and then get in there and create these quite thoughtful, time-consuming pieces. There's that really explosive element of spontaneity and inspiration stuff that happens. And the great thing that happens in these kind of things is people negotiate the space and it becomes really site-specific. So, like, you kind of hear about site-specific art in galleries, but it takes the edge off it when you don't...
A white cube is a white cube,
yeah,
isn't
exactly, exactly. Whereas when you've got this beautiful burnt-out shell or a big old hook hanging down or a hole in the wall that people can make into a mouth or... This is nice because it's obviously in the space there was a sink and it doesn't work. There was no water, and this encapsulates the sort of idea of just being impromptu, and that's a site-specific work in the best sense of the word because it's sprouting out of the sink. One of the early empty shows was in Williamstown, where it was like an old pub, and there was, easily 300 people all met at the train station, walked down with their bikes and their dogs and kids, and when the police come, there's this strange mixture of why are you here? Like, what are you doing? No one's even drinking.
I mean, to make the obvious point, though, this art is criminal.
Yeah, it's criminal, but look at this. Like, it's beautiful. How can you call that criminal? That wall's about to be bulldozed. So what's criminal? There's even stories of security guards giving tours to journalists who have broken in to try and cover these things that have happened, and security guards walking around going, my daughter loves this one, and and they're hired to keep people out of the building. So I think it's just human nature when something's obviously not about crime, and it's not like people go in and shoot up, and it's actually about going in and creating something and making something happen in this space that's otherwise useless.
Art isn't just about preserving the great historical things of the past. Artists working today are making things from the tools and the influences that they have around them. And quite frankly, not a lot of people have access to one of these. But these things, on the other hand, are a lot more common than grand theatres or even canvases. In the history of creative endeavours, I can't think of any tool that's ever been more useful for translating imagination into creativity. You can write, paint, draw, chat, collaborate, communicate, animate. You can even edit this TV show on one. Now, is there anything here you can do to make me look taller?
No.
To take just one example, these days more and more people are using these little boxes to make music. This is Kenny. Somehow he's made the transition from being a real classically trained musician to doing something or other on a laptop with an Australian hip-hop band called The Herd.
I was interested in music all my life, interested in computers all my life. While playing in all the various bands, I'd always think, I'd like to play drums, or I'd like to play this or that, and then I realized I can't actually play everything at the same time. Yet in my head, I can hear the music of what I want to happen. I started realizing the benefits of sampling and recording straight in. And from there, I moved on to making more electronic music on the computer, and from there on to hip-hop.
Yeah, we the modern day folk singers, even if the old folks...
The guys from The Herd were founders of an independent record company called Elephant Tracks.
That's the vocal booth in there. A little like a padded cell in there.
And that's where you send, band members that aren't behaving and lock them in there. Is that how it works?
That's right. We put food in under a slot under the door. This is the computer where we do all the sequencing and recording.
So isn't there meant to be a giant mixing desk here with 57 different tracks on it, or does this supersede that now?
Yeah, a lot of it's virtual these days. Is that?
Yeah.
Nowadays, computers are exposed to children from very young as well, so it becomes less of a scary toy and more of part of life. And so the people can adapt it, and it can be used as like an art form. Yeah, we treat it as a different instrument. It's hard work, believe it or not, sitting behind that computer. We're not just doing the email.
Computer technology means that artists can record, master, and even design artwork and distribute their music with a freedom and autonomy that would have been unthinkable decades ago.
I'm a skip, whitey round eyes surprise me. Use your stupid brain to please explain how this little country just went down the drain.
There's nothing like a live music venue. I don't know about you, but my cultural education's got a lot more to do with places like this than the conservatorium. But in a place like this, the worst thing you can be is a covers band. But it's easy to forget that actually mostly what we resource are in effect giant covers bands. Symphony orchestras, opera companies, even the major theatre companies, they mostly just play covers. I'm not saying these artists, actors and musicians don't do great covers. I mean, they're technically brilliant. But surely there's more to art than that. Surely art is about the reason why you make something. I mean, if you look at it like that, suddenly the most unexpected things can become important. Take computer games. Computer games aren't just some novelty distraction. They've actually become one of our largest cultural industries. And any cultural industry plays a major part in how we perceive the world around us. Or more specifically, take this computer game, Escape from Woomera.
We want to make a game about something that we care about. And lots of people did care about refugees at that stage, like half the country did at least. I wanted to see if the form could deal with this serious content. There are many games about the Second World War, for example, but I wanted to do something that was there right now and happening.
This game caused an outcry a few years ago when it received a tiny amount of arts funding. The conservative half of the country couldn't handle the thought it was about a contentious issue. And the lefty-arty half, well, they just couldn't stomach the idea of funding a computer game.
Go home from work and see what your kids are doing. Do you care? Did you care that your kids or your friends or whatever, don't have one single Australian game to play apart from AFL? Do we make games for Australians? No, we don't. We make games for export, for overseas. We make games we can't put an Australian accent in a game. I'm not even Australian, and I care more about Australian culture than these people seem to. I mean, they just...
I'm not sure whether you're convinced, but I know I was when Catherine first tried that argument on me. So this is an independent computer game developers conference called Free Play that we set up together a few years ago.
There's a lot of commercial pressures in the game industry, so if you want to get into the game industry, you're going to be faced with the genre system, or you've only got a few choices on the kind of art you can make. So an event like this is really kind of expanding the boundaries, letting people know that they can experiment on their own terms.
I've always just had an interest in not only playing games, but finding out how they actually work.
Got kind of bored playing old games and thought I could make my own and make them better.
The game developers here at Free Play have the most amazing, innovative ideas inside them bursting to get out, but almost no outlet with which to follow them. Computer game developers are stuck in the worst of all worlds. The creative industry really only receives any support on the grounds that it's commercially successful. What that means is that games like Escape from Woomera, or any game with an Australian accent or an Australian story, will rarely, if ever, get beyond the prototype stage.
So we're at a cusp now where we have to make a decision. Are we going to support it? Are we going to make this an artistic medium and kind of get the support of society at large? Or are we going to abandon it to commercial pressures?
This is the Sydney Symphony Orchestra performing the music of Mario Brothers. Some point between when these themes were written on 8-bit computers in the 1980s and when it's being performed at the Sydney Opera House, it's become validated as a serious art form. So on one hand, you've got the Sydney Symphony Orchestra playing the music of computer games at the Opera House, and yet here at Free Play, the chances of any of these guys getting to tell Australian stories in their computer games, practically nil. I guess it takes a really long time for us to validate a cultural form. We're only just starting to take film and photography seriously, and it's easy to forget that they're 19th century technologies. Our cultural hierarchies are all over the place. We value dead artists over living ones, technical proficiency over passion, and something we've seen many times before over something we've never seen before. It seems like we value predictability over imagination. It might be a little bit tricky to take DIY computer game hobbyists all that seriously, but, well, when it becomes a billion-dollar industry, suddenly everyone takes it seriously. Now, if the art world doesn't validate these things, one thing sure does: money. That's where we're going next week. Art and money.